I saw how people responded when I was willing to be vulnerable. And I realized how powerful vulnerability is. Passion really is driven by a personal connection to something.
Freedom is something as a framework that everyone can relate to, and that freedom to decide if, when, and how to have a family. That includes men. That includes the broader community, folks of all gender expression, because we all make those decisions.
I just do not believe that in the wealthiest, most developed nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. I think it should be the law of the land.
Hi, everyone. It's Minnie Tamaraju, President and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All. Welcome to another episode of My Body, My Pod, a reproductive freedom podcast. Today, we are so excited to welcome our good friend, a champion of reproductive freedom and equality, and the at-large member of Congress for Delaware, representing the entire state, Sarah McBride. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's so good to be with you, Minnie.
It's great to be with you. And, you know, when we started this podcast and our team started putting together the wish list of guests, your name was right on the top of the list. I know.
That's pressure.
No pressure. But it's in part because you've done such an amazing job in a short time of capturing, you know, the public's attention, being able to thread the needle between so many issues that, you know, progressives, Democrats, reproductive freedom champions care about. And you've got this amazing way of connecting in a plain, direct, spoken way with voters, which I think we all know, like, communication is key. And you're an empathetic leader. So I'm just excited to have this conversation with you today.
Gosh, thank you.
I'm buttering you up.
And now the hard questions.
No, probably. Well, maybe a little bit. Can you talk to me, can you talk to us about storytelling? Because it's been such a core part of your advocacy. I remember first learning about you through your personal storytelling, about your life experience, how you came to this point in your career. And I think it was when you were in the Obama White House that you started really telling your personal narrative.
Honestly, it was just a little bit before that. I was student government president at American University, and I came out as trans in the final hours of my term as student government president. And I have to be honest, up until that point in my life, I had really never engaged in personal storytelling. I was honestly a little uncomfortable with it because I never had wanted to sort of center my own story in my public advocacy. I'd always been comfortable advocating on behalf of other people. Mm-hmm. But when I was coming out to my family and then my friends, and then eventually coming toward the end of my term as student government president, when I was about to start to live authentically as myself, I thought, people are going to talk about this. And what is the best strategy of damage control, right? It's to get your news out on your own terms, in your own words.
But you were a college student and you were still able to think that strategically.
Well,
I think that's interesting.
I knew people. It's not every day in 2012 that the student body president comes out as trans, and I knew people would talk about it, and I wanted them to talk about it in a way that was as respectful as possible. Because while I had never done personal storytelling before, I knew that it is much more difficult to hate someone whose story you know or to mock someone whose story you know. And I decided that it would be better to get my news out there in my own way. And so I wrote a note on Facebook that the student newspaper then republished that sort of went by 2012 standards viral.
Yeah.
Limited virality in comparison to today's world. But I saw how people responded when I was willing to be vulnerable. And I realized how powerful vulnerability is. And then that experience was compounded when I went to the Delaware General Assembly in 2013 to advocate for a non-discrimination bill. And I would go in and I would talk about why non-discrimination protections were right for the community writ large, or why non-discrimination protections were good for Delaware's economy by allowing us to tap the talents and potential of everyone. And I'd watch the legislators who I was advocating to have their eyes just glaze over. And then my mom would start to talk, and she'd talk about her hopes and her dreams and her fears for me as her child, for our family. and I saw these legislators connect and understand and then develop a passion for doing the right thing in that moment. And, at the end of the day, politics is personal, and facts and statistics can illustrate a problem, they can inform, but passion really is driven by a personal connection to something. That's just true for all of us as empathetic creatures. It shouldn't have to take a personal connection, but it does drive something home, especially when, as an elected official, you're trying to prioritize so many different issues. Having someone in front of you, having a story in front of you makes all of the difference, and it brings those facts and statistics to life.
I think this is why, for our work, the abortion storytellers have been so powerful. They're the ones who can really change hearts and minds, content where people tell their first person narrative about what's happening to them when they live in a state with an abortion ban. But what strikes me about those stories and yours is it takes, and the word vulnerable, you're doing this at so much personal cost.
Yeah.
And that comes from a place of, obviously a commitment to public service, but you did this when you were very young, like over a decade ago. Was it that experience of coming out that led to you wanting to be an advocate? Connect the dots for us.
So first off, I will just say to something you just said, I think it has been so powerful to see the increasing confidence and courage of people coming out and sharing their own experience having an abortion.
Yeah.
Their own challenges.
Normalizing it too.
Exactly.
Right.
And because people maybe knew that 1 in 3 women,
right,
or I'm not sure what the statistic is right now, but that a large number of women had access to abortion care at some point in their lives. But that was a statistic, and it felt abstract. And then once people started telling their stories, and everyone else realized, oh, we're talking about people who are my neighbors, people who are my cousins or sisters or my mom or my daughter or my coworker. And it made it so much more personal, and it reinforced for the public, I think, that this wasn't something over abstract there or worthy of being in the shadows, but that it was care just like all other forms of care.
It's health care. Well, yeah, that's such a great point. And I think it's also about normalizing it, but also educating folks about the diversity of experiences that fall under abortion.
Yes.
So I think folks had this idea like, oh, well, you're pregnant, you don't want to be, and you casually go to a clinic.
Right.
And sure, sometimes that's the case, and that's our right. And that's our right to, make decisions about our own bodies. And we fight and protect that right. But then what we found is there's so many Americans who are like, wait a minute, I had an abortion, and I just saw it as a continuation of my care.
Yeah.
I thought it was miscarriage management, or I had a crisis, at some point in my pregnancy, or, I was in a vulnerable part of my life and I didn't want to continue this pregnancy. And that really broadened the scope of who can relate to it. But the other piece of it, and it goes to the messaging, which I do want to come back to later in our convo, is shifting the way we talk about it from, choices to freedom. And freedom is something as a framework that everyone can relate to. And that freedom to decide if, when, and how to have a family. That includes men. That includes the broader community, folks of all gender expression, because we all make those decisions, one way or another.
Right.
And it's not just about one medical act, although that medical act is the thing that's most under attack.
And then once we saw more people sharing those personal stories, I mean, it coincided with a whole host of other factors, I think, in our politics and in the law. But I think it had a pretty profound effect on public opinion.
Absolutely.
Around support for reproductive freedom in all of its forms. You asked how I got into advocacy from that. I always sort of considered myself an accidental advocate. I didn't necessarily anticipate that writing that post would result in 10 years in the movement. But it sort of spiraled because I wrote this note, and not only did that put me into the awareness of people in the movement But I saw how much of an impact it had. And I thought, God, I don't want everyone to have to share their story. That's a burden. That's a big burden for everyone. But if I have the capacity and a willingness to share my story, then it is such a critical ingredient for change, and I should do it. And, I have the benefit not just of all of the luck in my life that makes it less of a burden for me to share my story, but it's also been very healing for me.
Right.
To be able to share my story and to share my vulnerabilities. I'm a verbal processor just by nature. And so in some ways, my journey to healing as a person, whether it was, coming out or whether it was frankly processing the grief of losing my husband to cancer, I have found that when I share what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, not just with loved ones, but with the public, not only does it invite people into my own journey, but it helps me heal in the process.
I think we've heard that too from a lot of the abortion storytellers. Like, it's been such a traumatic experience to live in a banned state and have this almost die, bleed out in a parking lot. And it's a way to take your power back.
Yes.
It's a way to shift from being like the victim, and I'm using air quotes for folks who are listening, because none of these people are victims. You were not a victim, but it's a way to shift the energy and to wrest power and control back. And a lot of these movements that are against, LGBTQ plus folks and, everyone in this country fighting for their bodily autonomy, they're really about power and control, right? They're really about preventing us from having the freedom to make these decisions. So I think there's a through line for how we're experiencing this narrative work and the storytelling, but also the why and how it's so effective in pushing back against efforts to restrict us from having freedom.
Yes.
I want to ask you, if you don't mind, talking a little bit more about your husband and the lessons you carry from that chapter in your life and how you think that shaped what you're fighting for. We're having these big fights right now around healthcare.
Yeah. Knowing and loving Andy was my late husband's name, was the most formative experience of my life. And I had always cared about healthcare. I had always cared about making sure that every single person can get the care that they need to live and to thrive. In fact, I remember when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, and sort of having my own political and ideological awakening, there were sort of two issues that became my moral centers of gravity that made me realize I'm a Democrat. One was marriage equality and the other was healthcare. So I've always been passionate about it. But I would say no experience more than my time as a caregiver to Andy has informed my priorities, first in the Delaware State Senate and now in Congress. Andy was an attorney working to expand access to healthcare. We're actually working to implement the Affordable Care Act when I met him when I was still in college, a senior at American, and he just out of law school. And we fell in love really quickly. He was the kindest, smartest, and this is the most important trait in a partner, goofiest person that I had met.
I agree with that. My husband's also very goofy.
I love a silly partner. I need a silly partner. And about a year or so into our relationship, Andy was diagnosed with cancer. Ugh. And, it's a frightening thing to hear no matter your age, but you don't expect it when you're 26. Mm-mm. And it just feels like the world is coming crashing in on you. And both because of our awareness of the world, but also because of Andy's work in healthcare, from the first moments after getting that diagnosis, he knew how lucky he was. Both of us knew how lucky we were. We knew how lucky he was to have health insurance that would allow him to get care that would hopefully save his life. And we both recognized how lucky we were to have flexibility with our jobs that allowed him to focus on the full-time job of getting care and me to focus on the full-time job of caring for him, of loving him. And when we found out that his cancer was terminal, to marry him and to then walk him to his passing. And up until his last breath, he knew how lucky he was. And I just do not believe that in the wealthiest, most developed nation on earth, that time and that ability to get care should be a matter of luck. I think it should be the law of the land. And it's why in the Delaware State Senate, I work to expand access to healthcare and pass paid family and medical leave. And it's why I am so particularly outraged throughout the last 10 months in Congress to see Republicans in Washington pass not just the single largest cut to Medicaid in American history, but the single largest evisceration of healthcare in American history. I mean, people will die.
Yeah, they're dying.
People are dying
Yes.
and will die. An independent study
Yes.
found that 50,000 Americans will die preventable deaths a year because of that big ugly bill that was passed in July. It is a moral failing.
Yep.
It is appalling, and it has dangerous consequences. And while I wish we were moving in a different direction as a Congress, I know I am in the right place because in this moment it is a righteous fight to defend the healthcare of the American people.
It's a moral fight. It's like a moral imperative. And I feel like all of us who work in these related spaces, we have an obligation to fix this as fast as possible. And the fastest route is, winning back Congress. And we were just talking before this about the elections and how when this airs, it'll be a little bit farther away. But we're talking about the election this last week in November, where we won Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania Supreme Court race, Prop 50 in California, like utility commission races in Georgia,
across the country.
Across the board. I think the American people are, and I think President Trump has acknowledged this, the American people are pissed off and fed up. They want Democrats fighting for their health care. They want you fighting for their rights. And I think it's a good sign, but I think our work is just beginning.
I think it's just beginning. And I think, we have to, the candidates who won in Virginia, in New Jersey, in New York City.
In New York City, of course.
I think across all of those candidates, we saw them hone in on three kinds of politics across every campaign. The first was the politics of affordability.
Yep.
A politics that prioritizes the needs of working people across this country. The second was a politics that is curious and not judgmental. I'm a big fan of Ted Lasso, and I have a shirt from Ted Lasso that says, "Be curious, not judgmental." All of these candidates, they went out and they had conversations with voters. They had principled conversations with voters, but they went to places where there are people who supported them and people who didn't support them, and they didn't look down upon anyone. They were curious and brought their values and their perspectives to those conversations in a non-judgmental way. And then the final kind of politics we saw was a politics rooted in place. And whether it was now Mayor-elect Mamdani in New York or Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, no matter who it was, they were running with a deep sense of commitment to their local community, to their district, to their state, to their city, to this country, a politics that transcends partisanship and ideology and really recognizes our mutual responsibilities to one another as neighbors. And I think that if we as Democrats can replicate those three kinds of politics, the politics of affordability, the politics of curiosity, and the politics of place, regardless of where you are, in red areas or blue areas, in urban areas or rural areas, you can win with that type of politics.
I love that breakdown. And of course, I think when I had my first, conversation with you, and I think we were in a group, you're so brilliant at distilling a complex environment, because I've been watching 48 hours straight of punditry about the election. My head hurts a little bit, but I was like, I need to understand what folks are saying so that, I can do my part as well. And you've just distilled it so beautifully. I think the affordability connection is important. The only thing I'd add selfishly is values, values-driven campaigns, and freedom is a fundamental value, and I think it's interesting and notable that in many of these races, they try to use the anti-trans attacks again, and they failed. And I think it's because each of these candidates was like, let's talk about it.
Yes.
I'm not going to hide from it. And I think that's really important. Can you talk about that?
I'm really glad you not only brought up the attacks, but specifically made that point around candidates leaning in, because I think one of the mistakes that we saw, and I don't say this as a criticism of the people making decisions, because campaigns are, you're in the fog of war,
game
and
time decisions.
It's really challenging, but I do think one of the mistakes of the last election was that there wasn't a real response to the anti-trans attacks that we saw, and I also think that those attacks were the trans part was part of it. It was sort of a larger conglomeration of like all of the Republican greatest hits all in one, and it fed on this notion that the Democratic Party wasn't concerned with issues of universal need that touched sort of all Americans.
Special interests,
right.
them
right
was about others, not you.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things in the last election we saw actually transpire. The first is that our candidates leaned in and responded. In some cases, even proactively responded.
Correct.
They were willing to have a conversation. They stayed true to their values and met voters where they are at the same time. I do not think that those are mutually exclusive concepts.
Absolutely.
I think you can be curious. You can meet voters where they are. You can have a conversation in a way that stands firm in defense of vulnerable people and stands firm in defense of freedom, that doesn't also repel voters and push them away because you're telling them that they're bigots or you're shaming them. I think we can invite people into a conversation, and I think candidates successfully did that across the country in the last election. I also think that we saw sort of a flipping of the script with these folks, particularly in Virginia.
Yeah.
Because what we saw after the last election was Republicans, they thought, oh, we won on this they-them ad.
Yeah, so
right?
we're just going to double down on it.
We're going to become, I mean, and this was always true. The Republican Party always was the party that was obsessed.
Right.
With talking about bathrooms.
100%.
And trans issues. They were the ones that spent $200 million on ads around trans issues, not the Democrats. But they then took those results and completely misunderstood the lessons, and so focused in, especially in Virginia, on trans issues that
they didn't talk about
they
issues.
became the ones that were consumed with issues that didn't have universal impact or wide-scale impact. And the Democrats were able to regain that position as, look, we're going to defend the vulnerable, and we're prioritizing the issues of solving the problems that impact the large swath of the American people or Virginians. And also, these folks are focusing in on something that's not a problem. It's not a problem when trans people are living their lives. It's not a problem when trans people are welcomed and affirmed in their communities. There is not a problem that needs to be solved there. And I think that this past election really reinforced that Republicans completely overplayed their hand after the 2024 election, and went from being the party that was perceived to be concerned with affordability and became the party obsessed with demonizing a small, vulnerable group of young people. And we were able to rightfully claim the mantle as the party that's focused on working people and affordability.
And that is willing to, as you said, have the tough conversations.
Yes.
You know, we had Ruben Gallego on, and we had a very similar conversation about tackling, abortion rights in Arizona, and how he was able to go into, predominantly male Latino communities and talk very openly. They didn't always agree, but they all agreed on the fundamental freedom concept.
Yes.
They may not agree. They may not personally feel comfortable with making the decision to have an abortion. But when you explained it in terms and had open dialogue and said, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why you don't feel comfortable, and let's talk about what's happening in Arizona right now. So it goes to your point, having the tough conversations, being vulnerable. I'm not getting all the points exactly as you laid them out, but values-based and, not making people feel shame.
Yeah. Well, and I think we have to be able to grapple with the complexity of people.
Right.
And I think there is a difference between a person who's committed to and leading the charge, or even leading the charge against
right.
LGBTQ rights or
Right.
reproductive freedom, and someone who's entering a conversation with goodwill and good intentions. They might not be where we want them to be on every policy or every nuance, but fundamentally believe in the dignity of every person, and in that, their freedom to have agency over their lives, their bodies, and their destiny.
And that's, I think how in ballot measure after ballot measure, where we've been able to move independents and conservatives, Republicans over to us on abortion rights, it's been because we're willing to storytell, have the tough conversations, go into communities and say, these are the stakes. Mm-hmm. This is what could happen in your state. And it's a good pathway, which leads me to a conversation you and I've had before about the intersectionality between reproductive freedom and LGBTQ rights, both from how the movements have evolved, but also to how our opposition and our opponents have been so coordinated and systemic in their attacks. And I know you've been doing some reading and digging into the history of the anti-abortion movement, and I think you've been trying to figure out like lessons learned, other parallels. And I'm so curious to get your thoughts.
Well, it's still early in my
I know
research.
You don't have a ton of time to do the extra research.
I'm really trying to look back at various points in history to understand similarity in forces and dynamics and strategies to overcome. I think there are really two periods of time that I've been focusing in on and trying to understand what happened then and how that relates to this moment. One is the period after the Civil War, during and after Reconstruction, where I think there are a lot of similarities to what we're seeing right now, both culturally and economically. And then the period in the 70s and early 80s in the aftermath of the progress of the 60s of the Civil Rights Movement, and of course Roe in the early 70s. And then the rise of the, quote, moral majority and Ronald Reagan in the late 70s and 80s. And I think that there's a ton of lessons to learn, but I do think that one thing that we have to be crystal clear about as we are grappling with the onslaught of attacks we're seeing on people's individual dignity and their bodily autonomy, whether that's in the form of reproductive health care, gender-affirming care, or quite frankly, all forms of health care that people are losing the capacity to get care for because they're losing their coverage.
100%.
Is that one... These issues are inextricably linked. They're inextricably linked in an academic sense, right?
Yeah.
They're inextricably linked in the sense that these are all attacks on bodily autonomy. They're inextricably linked because, frankly, the transphobia and the homophobia that is at the heart of anti-equality policies is not able to be separated from the sexism and the misogyny that is at the heart of
abortion bans,
of attacking women's control over their body. That at the end of the day, all of these prejudices are rooted in one concept that far too many people have, which is that one notion at birth: the sex you are assigned should dictate who you are, how you love, what you do, and what you look like, right? Mm-hmm. And when we recognize
what your role is,
and what your role exactly what your role is, that's what I mean. What you do,
yes.
And I think that we have to recognize that they're inextricably linked in that way. They're inextricably linked in not just abstract, sort of philosophical ways. They're linked from a legal perspective.
Yes,
the laws, the precedent, the decisions that are being made in state legislatures and in the Supreme Court.
Right, in the Dobbs decision.
Right.
Clarence Thomas's dissent.
Right.
Laying out a roadmap.
Right.
To
both our progress and the regression
to attack
we've
and
seen.
Reverse marriage equality.
Right. If they are able to ban abortion, then it's easier to ban gender affirming care.
Right.
If we are receding in the right to privacy, well, that is a right that is at the heart of the Lawrence decision in the early 2000s that struck down the anti-sodomy laws across the country. The laws and the precedent connect these issues. And the strategies that are being employed in courts and in legislatures to undermine these rights are, in so many instances, quite literally the exact same arguments. And then finally, they're linked in that they are the same
people,
forces.
Well, and they're funded by the same dark money.
Yep.
They've got the same legal and organizational structures. And it's just important for, I think, folks in both of our movements to understand that.
Yes.
Because it's so easy for them to try to demonize and tear us apart.
Yes. Yes.
I could go on and on and on this topic. I'm going to unofficially ask you to let's have a round 2 when you've done more of the research, because I think that's
we'll come back.
Really, really fascinating, and I'll do some of my own research too. But I want to end on some one question about what's going on in Congress, and then one personal question. So right now, what are your hopes? What do you think is going to happen? I know we're going to be releasing this episode a little later, but we are in the government shutdown.
Yeah.
All kinds of chaos is ensuing. FAA, flight delays, flight cancellations, SNAP benefits expiring, et cetera, et cetera. Where's your focus?
Well, I've been coming down to Washington from Delaware. It's not too long of a commute, even
looking for your colleagues on the Hill. I've seen videos.
Searching for Republicans. I have still not really found any. They might have one or two here on any given day to gavel the House in and ignore our demands that they swear in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. But besides that, they're none to be seen.
Shameful.
But every day I come here, I'm coming here to bring the experiences and the voices of Delawareans to the halls of Congress at this critical moment, because we are experiencing a series of crises in this moment that we have to grapple with. We don't have the luxury of waiting and deprioritizing any one of these crises. One is obviously the government shutdown and the fact that nearly 1 million federal workers are being furloughed or forced to work without pay. People who can't afford to go without a paycheck are being forced to go without paychecks across this country. We have, of course, critical federal programs that are being ground to a halt because they don't have the workforce necessary or the funding available to continue to process SBA loans or
compromising public safety, compromising public services, well-being of our communities.
And so the shutdown is a crisis in and of itself that is having real consequences on the American people, including this president cynically using them to try to harm vulnerable people by trying to cut off SNAP funding, by trying to use it as an opportunity disingenuously to fire more federal workers, which he's already been doing illegally for the last 10 months.
Correct.
Then, of course, there's this crisis in healthcare in this moment, specifically right now around the expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which 50,000 of my constituents rely on for affordable healthcare. If they continue to expire, which people are experiencing right now, not next year, right now as they try to enroll in ACA plans during open enrollment, my constituents in many cases will see their premiums increase 100, 200, 300%.
Wow.
A family of 4 in
300%. What does that look like?
It looks, for some people, it looks like thousands and thousands of dollars more a year in healthcare costs. For small businesses, it can mean, I just spoke to a medium-sized nonprofit in Delaware that provides care for medically complex children. Will see their healthcare bills rise by $500,000 for their nonprofit next year because of the expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credit, because they use ACA plans to provide affordable coverage to their employees because they're so small that they can't get the group insurance at a reasonable rate. And so that healthcare crisis in this moment is upon us. It's absolutely compounded on top of the cuts to Medicaid and Medicare that were passed in the big ugly bill.
And just every time we talk about Medicaid, I just have to remind folks also the defunding of Planned Parenthood. That was
absolutely,
which is it's like the perfect storm. And we don't have paid family leave, which you've worked on so hard.
Yeah.
We're forcing birth. We don't have benefits for kids. We're not able to feed them. Like, what on earth is happening?
From a so-called pro-life, pro-family party.
Exactly.
That was something I tried to really harp on in my remarks on the floor and in debate on the big ugly bill, was that it contained a backdoor abortion ban.
100%, correct.
And people needed to understand that when you choke off funding for healthcare institutions that provide abortion care, that is a backdoor abortion ban, because you will essentially eliminate access to care in communities across this country. And so the attacks on care, the crisis in healthcare in this moment, is one that is already upon us and needs to be addressed. I hope, and again, I don't know what the reality will be when this comes out. I hope my Republican colleagues come to the table. I hope that Donald Trump, John Thune, and Mike Johnson actually come to the table to negotiate on this. Because if there was a message that the American people sent in this 2025 election, it's that elected officials need to do the hard work of governing in bringing down the cost of living and addressing this affordability crisis. And that includes, it's what I hear about more than anything else in Delaware, the cost of healthcare.
Do your damn job.
Show up, do your job.
Right.
And also, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to swear in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva so that we can get the 218th signature on that discharge petition that Mike Johnson is literally shutting down the House in order to prevent happening.
It's unbelievable. We have a huge chapter in Arizona that worked on her campaign and has been lobbying just on this issue. And it's just been appalling. I'm going to end with a lighter question. If someone's visiting Delaware for the first time, what's your must-see, must-eat, must-do recommendation?
Well, I will always give a plug for my happy place in Delaware, which is Eastern Sussex County, Rehoboth Beach and Lewis, Delaware.
Oh, yeah. Gorgeous.
I love going to our beaches. They are lovely communities, whether it's the ocean front communities or our bay communities like Lewis, Delaware, which is the first town in the first state and has a absolutely charming Main Street.
Oh,
I would recommend people visit.
Well, I'm going to have to go.
Have you not been?
I've not been to Rehoboth.
I
used to live in Philadelphia, and I mean, it's just...
You've lived in Philadelphia and
Maryland,
DC,
and Maryland, and I haven't been to Rehoboth.
Been to Rehoboth.
I know. I feel so much shame right now. I shouldn't have told you
that.
All
right,
that.
Minnie, you're going to have to come with me. We're going to go out to dinner at there's some great restaurants on Baltimore Ave. And then we'll go to...
Are they kid-friendly? I have 6.5-year-old twin boys, so they have to be able
We're going to find you a babysitter because we're going to go to a really great
nice
restaurant.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't have to be nice, but we're going to go to a good restaurant there. And then, this is why you're going to need a babysitter, we're going to have to go to Aqua, which is an outdoor LGBT bar in
that
Rehoboth,
sounds
Baltimore
amazing. And my kids do really well on a beach, so that sounds
great. You can have fun with the kids during the day, and then we can go out and have fun on Baltimore Ave.
As long as they have access to sand and water, they are happy little men. Okay, and then what is your self-care ritual? I think I might know what it is, though. It might be going to the beach. I mean, in Rehoboth.
I will tell you,
you're working your butt off. What do you do to relax and have?
So when I'm in Delaware, I'm typically working. I have to tell you, I have spent way too much money on DoorDash. I have the most disgusting order of Taco Bell KFC that I get as my happy place. It's actually 3 meals in one.
It sounds delicious.
But I love just turning off and watching some crappy reality TV shows.
What's your favorite?
Traitors.
Oh.
Have you ever watched Traitors?
I've watched a little bit of it. I have to get more into it.
Just a little bit? How does one watch just a little bit of Traitors, Minnie? It's so good.
The challenge is it's hard for me to binge anything with my kids. I end up watching, whenever I'm home, I end up watching kid stuff.
Yeah.
Or stuff my husband likes to watch. But I will download some episodes of Traitors.
Do you like competition reality shows?
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. And I got to tell you.
I'm not as into the Housewives franchise or the Love is Blind, but I like the more competition.
Like Big Brother, Survivor. No? Okay.
British Bake Off.
Okay, British Bake Off.
Top Chef, things like that.
Okay, so you like the food? I like the food ones too.
Yeah. I love to eat.
Traitors is a little bit more Survivor, Big Brother style.
But isn't that the one with Alan Cumming?
It is.
Yeah. No. It's hilarious.
It's really good. The U.S. version, they're actually coming out with a U.S. version that's not a celebrity version. I think the non-celebrity versions of Traitors are better because you get better gameplay. Because if everyone knows one another when they go to the house to play the game, you can't do the deception.
Wait, so should you be on this show? Do we need to petition? Is this a thing? Oh, I see. I think maybe that's what's happening here. Okay, we're going to work on a strategy.
I might not be able to say no. It's so good. It's so good. It might be the end of my political career, but
actually, no.
They did. No, it was after his career, but they had the former Speaker of the British House of Commons on the American version the last season.
I mean, the thing is, I think the other thing we could learn from the Mamdani race is the person who captures attention.
That's true.
Is the person who could catapult to the next level. So it could be part of your long-term political strategy. That's all I'm saying.
Listen, if they offer, I'm open to it. But
you heard it here first. It's on Peacock? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's NBC Universal?
Okay, but let me just plug. They also have the seasons from the UK, Australia, and New Zealand.
Oh.
And I think the international seasons are actually
So I should go back and start with the UK.
Do the UK.
Okay.
I think season 1 of Australia is really good. Season 2 of Australia is infuriating in a good way. It's the best and worst gameplay I've ever seen in my life. So I recommend Australia Traders too.
I have a couple of long flights. I'm going to download a bunch of episodes.
Do it.
And then I'll report back to you.
Please. I'll read the books and you'll report to me on Traders.
Yeah, you'll read the books about abortion and I'll watch Traders and we'll have a follow-up episode. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned as much as I have. Find us wherever you've listened to your podcast. That could be Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, you name it. Thanks for joining us. And we'll make sure to let you know when we have Sarah McBride back.